Stand for the pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call.
Urken,
Brad Nelson, Grady Rhodes, Levoy Hurley.
Richard Fridena.
Brian Bickel, and we do have 5 members, which is what it takes to have a quorum. I see no members of the public present, so we won't have a call to the public. Chairman's report. I think everyone realizes that we did lose a member prior to last meeting. We sat around wondering why he wasn't here or hadn't responded. I don't think any of us anticipated what actually happened, but I'd like to take this opportunity to posthumously thank Chris for his contributions to this committee. I know he's been here for, or had been here for a substantial period of time, provided some enthusiastic interaction on an occasional basis. But if we could have just a brief moment of silence for Chris Cole. Okay, and on a more insensitive note, have we heard anything from the Libertarian Party about their intentions?
Shortly
Since
after,
he was the Libertarian Party.
shortly after Chris's death, a gentleman who was a past chair, Scott, pardon me, I cannot remember his last name, came to my office, asked for a list of the various Libertarian precinct committee people, and there was an intention on his part to call an emergency meeting to bring about new administration within the party. That was supposed to have been done if he was able to get that group together on the 13th of this month. I'm not certain what the outcome of that meeting was.
And there is no requirement that you be a precinct committee person to serve on this commission. Okay.
Well, I'm just saying, for them to elect a new chair.
For them to elect a new chair, reorganize. Yeah, I did notice in my work that they have 6 officers and they have 6 precinct committee persons, so it's not like they have a very vibrant organization that they have to deal with from a governance perspective. Another issue that I think has to do with elections, I find it a little bit intriguing, and it impacts me directly. I did have an email conversation with Ann Lilly this past week, just trying to update my precinct committee person roster for the Democratic Party, and asked when the statements of intent were going to be posted on the website. And the reply I got, I thought was rather interesting. They don't intend to put them on the website, which to me kind of defeats the purpose of passing the legislation in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason the legislature passed the legislation was so that people would know they had an opponent. And if you're running at least at the county level, you have to inquire as to whether you have an opponent now. Just a bit interesting. And I realize next year's elections are going to be an absolute cluster. Just because so many changes have taken place that a lot of people in the political arena simply aren't aware of, don't understand, don't know how it's supposed to work.
Well, it changes all the time.
Yeah, but these changes have been significant.
Yes.
So you can go out, you can collect your signatures and do all that kind of stuff without ever filing that you're into.
No,
Well, that's what's about to
that's
change.
That's the statement of intention.
Right, but you've been able to do that.
Up until
The 27th.
But you have to have filed a statement of organization in order to be able to do that.
Now you do.
Well,
No, now you have to file a statement of intention. In order to start collecting petition signatures, you had to have filed a statement of organization.
so This is a law that goes into effect on August 27th, and I may not be getting it exactly right, but basically there was a desire from just the citizenry, media, political parties to know who's running, or at least who's intending to run. So the legislature said that from here on out, starting on August the 27th, a candidate, not for PCs, but a candidate for other elected offices, must file with their appropriate filing officer a statement of interest. I think is what it's called. Is it intention? Okay. At any rate, there's been no direction on what that form should look like. We've made up our own, and I believe other jurisdictions may do that as well. We've got it ready to go, but the way the statutes read right now pertaining to this new law is that as of August the 27th, if you're collecting petition signatures thereafter, they are subject to not being included in your count.
Actually,
It's pretty.
that statement of intention has been filed by several people,
Yeah.
me being one of them. But, yeah, you have to file that after August the 27th. In order to collect signatures, that has to be filed.
For the record, Barbara Tellman has joined it.
Yay!
Other than that, I have nothing, and since Parker's now here, procedures manual is the next item on the agenda.
As Michael has informed us, the procedure manual is now available on the Secretary of State's website. I don't know how many of you have looked at it. It's pretty comprehensive. It's certainly an enormous improvement over the last attempted version. I'm planning to comment on 6 sections, parts of 6 sections. And I hope that some of the rest of you are. I will be commenting on some things in the registration section, voting equipment, conduct of elections, central count, hand count. I guess that's what I'm doing. If some of you are particularly interested in who gets voter data, you might want to check the registration section. If you're interested in early voting or ballot verification, chapters 1 and 2 are relevant. Chapter 4 deals with voting security, equipment, that sort of thing. And probably everybody should look at that. And how many of you have actually delved into this yet? Yeah, it's pretty intimidating, but if you look at the table of contents and just pick out the things you want, it's nicely done, so you can click on that section and go right to it. You don't have to scroll down.
Is there a cutoff date for public comment?
I believe it's the hearings, which there'll be 2 hearings in September. But the sooner you get them in, the better.
And the date that it has to be presented to the Attorney General?
October 1.
October 1. And the hearings are late September, so they're not going to be making many changes between the hearings and the presentation. And some of my comments are areas where Pima County does things that other counties don't do, like a party LNA, and I'm going to suggest that not only if they can't require it, but that they leave that option open. See, there's nothing in the law to keep you from doing that, and it's advisable.
I'm sorry, I missed that. A party plan.
The party does a logic and accuracy test down here.
Okay.
And one of the things that does is that it checks accuracy of the count on local elections. The Secretary of State's logic and accuracy test doesn't go down to that level. So the parties are the only ones who are assuring the public that the machines are counted correctly. Same thing with the hand count. It's pretty late. The hand count is the same argument that we do the hand count down to we have the option of doing the hand count down to the local level, which we had to go to the Attorney General to get an opinion on. Do you remember when that was?
It was actually, I cannot remember the date. I remember that it was a countywide bond election, and that we asked whether we could do a hand count. We meaning the board supervisors, forward that question to to the Secretary of State, who kicked it over to the Attorney General. The Attorney General basically said, in the spirit of the hand count audit, the county has the option to do so. So we've done it once so far. But
We
was
did it
a
once
problem.
with the city.
The city is a different breed of cat, so it's very likely.
So I just want to put in that there's an option and the Attorney General has certified that it's okay to do.
On the subject of hand count audits, they're not required. And it's less, and they're optional because less than 50% of the counties do a hand count audit. And it isn't because of lack of willingness on the part of the county, it's the political parties that can't get anybody to participate in a hand count audit. So without party participation, you don't get a hand count audit done. I believe 6 of the 15 counties actually do a hand count audit or did go by school.
It fluctuates a little bit, but right around 6 sounds about right.
Another thing something I found lacking was a really clear description of how you register a voter who does not have his citizenship proof with him. There was a decision, it was a recent law court decision, and it was a little bit confusing in their description of what you do about that. You still need to prove citizenship, but you don't have to prove it when you register. The county can chase you down if they can't find you in motor vehicles.
Just a comment on the hand auditing. The standards are changing rapidly, and even though Pima County is exceptional in Arizona, there are other states that are taking auditing more seriously, not only with respect to what we normally think of, but going beyond. I'm not talking about risk-limited auditing, which is
You're going beyond the scope of the manual.
well, but I mean,
Unless you want to comment on that.
the manual doesn't include those other issues, does
I
it?
think then you should comment on that.
I'm sorry?
Then you should comment.
Well,
on that.
actually, I'll ask Tom Ryan. He's the most knowledgeable person I know about
Yeah.
So I think, reading the manual, the sections that talk about registration of the voters, they do, if they have not proven that they're a U.S. citizenship, they do have the ability to vote a federal-only ballot. So to add a caveat to your statement of they cannot vote a full
You're
ballot.
right, you're right.
It's a federal-only ballot that they will be voting if they have not proved U.S. citizenship.
I think that section is written in a very confusing way for somebody who's registering voters to try to figure it out.
that. Is there any explanation of why they're not given a provisional ballot, since they could conceivably be qualified?
No, we're talking registration.
Registration. Different.
But you said that they were given a federal-only ballot.
That's right.
They're registered as a federal-only candidate because they can't.
Okay.
They can't
Okay.
prove citizenship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Federal-only
And
vote.
they're told that, I believe they're told that that's what they are registered as.
And another thing I found lacking, and maybe they don't have the jurisdiction, is to talk about voter registration through the Department of Transportation through motor vehicles. I can't see any mention of that anywhere in the manual. And maybe they don't have jurisdiction over that department, so they don't mention it, but I think we should at least know that.
This is a huge, huge issue that nobody wants to touch. Because they operate in separate worlds. You're right.
Any observations from the Department of Elections perspective on the procedure?
I agree with Barb's and perhaps other people in the room who looked at I'll call it the Eric Spencer edition that was proposed by Secretary Reagan. That was, in most people's opinions who would eventually have used that, almost an unworkable document. So it is an improvement. There has been a great deal of input from the counties, both recorders as well as elections officials. And that's ongoing during this public comment as well, so that door has not yet closed. I have found Secretary Hobbs' administration very open to communication, so if this group or individuals within this group want to make a recommendation or ask questions, I would guarantee you're going to receive an answer, not gonna just hit a wall. The vast majority of changes, because of various cases within the courts at the state and federal level, I would say pertain more to voter registration than it does to tabulation and the operation on election day. I have not looked at the voter registration chapters because they don't pertain to what I do every day in detail. I mean, I've read through them, but within the elections environment, I think one of the things is a growing understanding that even though we're 15 different counties and do things 15 different ways, some do hand counts, some don't, things of that nature, that we are getting closer and closer to having it uniform. And that was the whole purpose for the manual in the first place. I was around when they had the first one, and it was helter-skelter before that, so at least everybody now has a document that they know what to do. Whether they do it or not is another question entirely.
And I would make the observation that voter registration is not within the purview of this commission, but as individual members, if you have concerns in that area, certainly feel free to come anytime. That section of the procedures manual, it is within the purview of the Secretary of State. Arnold.
That's your personal opinion, not the commission's.
No, it's my conversations with the Board of Supervisors. And
Well,
why
That's not argument, except that I think it's established.
Okay.
Because we have the other documents that you provided that talked about shared responsibility and cooperative behavior as being necessary a long time ago.
Well, one other thing that I commented on in the central count was the problem that came up, or the question that came up with the last election. What do you do with ballots that were dropped off? Not early ballots, but ballots that were voted at the polling place and turned in. They're not counted there anymore. And the description in the manual assumes that they will be counted at the polling place, and therefore, if there's a problem, they don't have to be duplicated if there's a problem with them. And this came up last time when there were some questionable ballots that they would have ordinarily duplicated, but they thought they couldn't because they came from the polling place. That makes sense. And so I think that needs to be clarified, that if they're not counted by a device at the polling place, they should be treated for duplication purposes, just like early ballots.
Do we?
We don't have scanners at the polls, so that's not an issue for us. So if I'm following you, Mark, so when ballots from the polls come in on election night, they are run through the same scanners as early ballots are for the days before, and then you sort those. So there are the ability to sort for blank ballots, for overvotes, things of that nature as well. So there is some duplication of polling place ballots, but probably not to the same degree as there is for
Well,
early
we got
ballots.
partly through the last election, and David realized that he wasn't following the rules, and that he couldn't do that. And it wasn't made clear, so I think that needed to be made clear.
Yeah, that's the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, well, he was complaining about it. His
Who?
name, David Wisely.
Oh, okay,
Talk to him.
all right.
Okay. Anything else on the procedures manual?
I just urge everybody to, yeah.
City elections.
Yeah, we marked our early ballots yesterday. The LNA will be next Tuesday, and I believe the Green Party is participating along with the Democrat and Republican Party. So far, they have received from the recorder 32,000 ballots, which is a pretty small number, but given the fact that there are no contests in any Republican contest whatsoever, you wouldn't expect the Republicans to be turning out in big numbers. And there's only one besides the mayor, there's a contest in one Democratic precinct. And so we expect the attendance to be, the vote to be higher in those areas and those parties, but they're not expecting more than about 17%.
Precinct or ward?
Right, exactly.
I thought there were two contests for Democrats. 1 and 4 both had contests for Democrats.
No,
I think it's just four.
One Democrat and one Republican in 2 wards. In other words, there's no Republican.
I thought they didn't have two primaries.
So some people will be getting like ballots in wards that don't have any Republicans.
We should figure it out.
And the question is, what should they do with them? Should they return them? Or should they not return them? If they return them, should they make some kind of a comment on them? This was a discussion I had with the Republican yesterday. And she was urging that people return them so they be counted as voters for the purpose of next time determining the number of petition signatures needed.
And this is just a make me smarter question. I believe it's Ward 4, where Michael Hicks is running as a Republican. Do all of those people get a ballot? All of the Republicans
Yeah.
get a ballot?
Yeah.
Automatically.
Yeah.
Okay,
But in
but they vote for no mayoral candidate because there is none. They're voting for a candidate in an uncontested primary.
So
That's
what's the
it.
point of running? And that this is
Well,
relevant.
Well, there's always potential for write-ins in any of those wards. I mean, any of the 3 wards.
The write-ins have already been certified, so there is a Republican write-in in Ward 1.
Yes, there is.
That's okay.
Who's your Republican counterpart?
Karen Schutte.
Okay, thank you.
And she was telling me that one of the reasons why it matters how many people are counted as voters is the case that the Republicans now have against the proposition sanctuary amendment on the ballot. That the issue in the court is whether they should count how many people voted for governor, or not for governor, for mayor, versus how many people voted in the election but didn't vote for mayor. And that's the crux of the issue, because if they voted in the election but not for mayor, then this number of signatures needed is higher.
And there is no general election there's a general election for mayor. There is no Republican candidate for mayor in the general election.
Yeah.
And that count is based on the general election, not the primary election.
But I don't understand, is the outcome really just a plurality outcome? Does it matter how many people turn out for the election, or?
No, the number of signatures required is based on something. And the issue in the court is whether that's based on the number of people who actually voted for mayor.
Is this
versus
a
the
new
number-
issue?
No.
Is this?
It's in the court right now.
It's the number of, the signature requirement for candidates is based on the number of registered voters. The signature requirement for initiatives is based on the number of ballots cast in a given election. And I think what that given election is what's the issue right now, and what ballots get counted. The way the initiative level at the state reads is it's the number of ballots cast in the gubernatorial election.
For governor.
For governor.
Yeah.
The issue at the city level is it the number, because you have people in wards that probably aren't going to vote. Because you have an uncontested mayoral election, you're going to have a reduced number of ballots cast, which significantly reduces the number of signatures required, and I think that's the issue that they're trying to resolve.
So the judge is supposed to issue a ruling today just on that number, which number they should use.
There's actually 4 potential numbers. There's a constitutional statement about it, and calculation. There's a state statute. There's what the city uses, and then there's what the Republicans are saying they should be using. So there's
So,
4
Yeah, and so I think part of this, as my understanding, is there's a city charter
Yeah.
that is overriding, that is specifying this. And it's that city charter, separate from the state law, that is being interpreted here.
So what they were told may not have been accurate.
Is there any doubt that the advocates of the proposition would have time or the ability to get more signatures if they
Oh,
wanted?
no, that's way too much.
Once you pass the deadline, once it's off, it's off.
The other reason that the number of people who vote, whether they vote a blank ballot or not, matters to the city is that there's a new law that was passed last year that says if the cities have less than a certain percentage turnout, they can no longer have off-year elections. They would have to have elections for even years, which means they would have to go with the county and forget the city having elections.
Regardless of charter.
Yeah, that's a new state law. Of course, that'll probably be challenged if whatever. But so the city is really a little interested in the final turnout.
They didn't know that.
If you want job security in the state of Arizona, be election attorney.
No, thank
I also talked with them and with FAN about the problem of the ballots that were mailed out incorrectly, and I got somewhat different answers from the two. The recorder's office has a system whereby they can, well, let's see, let's start with. The problem is that they have to start printing the ballots before the voter rolls are complete. People still have a chance to re-register or change their registration after they have to send the ballots to the printer. And the ballots going to the printer also have the addresses. So it's always going to be out of date. So the recorder's office has a system for pulling the out-of-date ballots and replacing them. Apparently, the city did not use that system, they did their own thing. The city representatives told me that she thought they got bad rules from the recorder's office. So I have no idea what the situation is, but that's the reason for the problem, that there's such a tight deadline between last day of registration and when they begin to print ballots.
Well, I have an item on the city of Tucson election that has to do with the election workers. And I'll pass this around, I didn't make copies, but this has to do with the recruitment of poll workers. And it says here, one of the requirements is they must be affiliated with a major party, Democrat or Republican, or closely with the opposing party as a requirement. This is in the first part here. And that seems to exclude libertarians, Greens, and independent voters from showing up as poll workers at the city elections, which seems rather restrictive in terms of increasing public participation in elections.
I think poll workers, are you talking about emergency polls?
Poll workers. No, poll workers. The people-
So I thought there weren't any poll workers.
Because it's got mail, but
they're
that's-
mail only.
There are the vote center workers on election day.
Right.
Okay, so not poll workers, they're elections workers, but not at the poll, they're in
They're at
the
a place
election
that it's
center.
not called a poll, but it serves
Right.
a purpose on election day.
That is, and again, if it has, I don't believe the county publishes those same restrictions.
No. There are, again, speaking of a polling place, that you have fire stations and schools and things of that nature. There is a requirement for some of the board members, poll workers, if you will, to be affiliated with the major parties, but not all. So Greens, Libertarians, including party not designated,
Right.
can serve as well. So we do not even mention that restriction. We do say you need to be a registered voter in the state of Arizona. So if you're that and breathing and can read and write and speak,
I probably think from a Green Party perspective,
Sure.
that's a battle that the Green Party needs to take up with the city elections
Yeah.
department.
Right, and the city this year really affected the Green Party in terms of participation in the city election. And I believe we will have some more candidates and a mayoral candidate come forward after the primaries. But they're all restricted to write-in votes, which really complicates things because the Greens had, when they won their case, the city sent out a letter to all the Greens saying that, oops, we made a mistake. You guys actually are going to have a primary, but all your candidates have to be write-in. And so there's questions about, meeting the signature requirements, if we're gonna have enough votes and stuff, because it created a really confusing mess for many people.
And the November election should be interesting for some wards because, or some school districts, because some people will get two very short ballots, one from the county and from the school district, and one from the city with almost nothing on it.
November elections, that's yours.
Speaking of which, so the following school districts are going to have elections in November. That election day is November the 5th. That's the Flowing Wells Unified School District, Alter Valley Elementary School District, Amphitheater Unified School District, Sunnyside Unified School District, and there's one fire district up in kind of the northern part of the county called Boulder Ranch. The school districts are all override elections. The fire district, Boulder Ranch, is having a bond election.
And they're all by mail.
They are all by mail. Each one of the school districts is a single question, save for Amphi. They are having 2 questions on their particular ballot.
I missed the first school.
Sure. Flowing Wells,
Okay,
Alter Valley, Amphi, Sunnyside.
great, thank you.
And those, even though they're bond elections, they still fall under the purview of the superintendent of schools.
Correct. By statute, the superintendent of schools conducts elections. We enter into an IGA. When I say we mean my office as well as the recorder's office with their own separate IGA to support the county school superintendent.
Any other questions on the November elections? Okay. Information on federal funds to the Secretary of State.
I think this was started by Mr. Cote, and after the 2016 election, of course, there was all kinds of news articles and talking heads all about interference in the election, whether it be foreign or domestic and things of that nature. So in early 2018, before the, if you will, midterm elections in 2018, Congress authorized approximately $380 million to go to the states, predominantly for, I'll call it cybersecurity, but that's a big umbrella. The state of Arizona received about $7 million. Most of that, I think, is going to go, or has already gone under the Reagan administration since it was awarded when Secretary Reagan was still in office, towards getting a new and improved statewide voter registration system up and running. However, there will be some monies allotted to the individual counties. The way that it's going to work is, I believe, and it's still in a state of flux, but becoming firm, that every county, regardless of whether you're Maricopa County or whether you're Greenwood County, meaning there's a vast difference in geography, demographics, population, things of that nature, everybody's going to get $100,000 off the top, and then they allotted additional funds based on population. But if you're a small county, you're going to have a higher factor than a lower county, with the assumption that Pima and Maricopa and perhaps other counties have relatively deep pockets compared to La Paz County or Greenwood County and things of that nature. So they're going to be a little low. That being said, it looks like Pima County is going to have the option of receiving approximately $250,000 out of this $380 million that went federally. The way that's going to be administered is there's a, for lack of a better term, a bucket that says Pima County on the side with $250,000 in it. We then make proposals to the Secretary of State to say, we want to do X, Y, Z, and we think this falls under the requirements of cybersecurity or whatever, and we want to spend arbitrarily $10,000. That gets approved, then we start using the funds. So we don't receive those funds. It's in a bucket of the Secretary of State's office.
So you and FN ostensibly share the contents of that bucket.
Correct.
Have either you, to the extent that you are aware, either you or FN made any requests of the funds in that bucket yet?
Again, the funds are still in a state of flex, and so we haven't been, I think, given the green light to begin to make applications. One of the questions FN has is that since this was awarded in 2018, and she or maybe other jurisdictions across the state had incurred an expense that could be defined as cybersecurity, could they be reimbursed for that money that they spent in previous times? Right now, the Secretary of State is suggesting the answer to that is yes. So that's still in flux, but I think as opposed to some of the other funding, there is a use it or lose it date on this as well.
Is there anything that the Elections Department intends to ask for money for, or would like to ask for money for?
One of the things that we would probably ask for, and I think it might be covered under this because it is security, it is not cybersecurity, but our current video surveillance system and the way that we archive that video surveillance is getting a little old and not user-friendly anymore. That's probably the number one thing that comes to mind. Not that the system that we have right now doesn't work, but we would like something a little bit better. Cameras that you could actually articulate and point in various directions and things of that right now, they're good cameras. There's a bunch of them all over the place, but there are some dead spots. Now, there are dead spots that we think are not of a security nature, but we are thinking, well, we'll get additional cameras that are articulated, and then the blind spots will be much less.
Sounds like cybersecurity to me. I mean, it's very broad.
Yeah.
It's communication.
Yeah, so that's probably the number one thing. We had a representative from Department of Homeland Security come down and do a physical assessment of us, meaning not anything related to tabulation, but how secure is your building? And we've got their report back from that individual, and there's nothing really huge there. They are taking a worst case scenario. They are imagining, and I don't mean to sound facetious, but and some people may take it as such, but is somebody going to run a semi-truck through the building?
I was going to say blow the doors off.
Yeah. So all those things that I think most would agree have a slim chance of occurring. Do we want to put, basically concrete stanchions around the building so nobody can get close, things of that nature. So we are still looking at the report. I've only had it for about a week or so, but the number one thing that we think needs to be done is probably increase video surveillance, articulated cameras in a better system.
Yeah, the physical ballots aren't stored in that building anyhow, are they?
I'm not sure
The ballots, the actual paper ballots,
they are in that building.
Temporarily.
temporarily.
Oh, yeah, as far as once the election is over with, yes, then they go to the
To the other place.
to the treasurer's office, to that other place, yes, to the treasurer's office. So from about, if you will, 45 days before the election, we've got blank ballots ready to go to the polls for people to use for about, needless to say, on election day, and for maybe 20 days after election day, we are in possession of the ballots there. But those are the only times.
Do you or your staff think that Homeland Security did a good assessment, or based on what you've seen so far?
I would say it was very thorough. She was down there for almost the entirety of the day, was given access to wherever she wanted to go. She was even looking at the dumpsters on the outside of the building and adjacencies and what buildings were next and escape routes and everything else. So she was extremely thorough.
With respect to those issues, but for example, I mean, it's clear now that Russia or other countries are not necessarily aimed at intervening in the way most people think, that you're going to tip the election one way or the other, but that the goal is to disturb the election, to create enough uncertainty and distrust to destabilize things that way. Do you think that's been addressed? Because my impression is no.
I think it is being addressed, but it's an equation that is still in process. So in other words, I would suggest that there is little, if nothing, that local jurisdictions, by that I mean counties and states, can do to keep misinformation from being out in the world. But we can do things such as, for example, phishing attack. somebody sends an email to my department, and they open up a link, and suddenly we've got some kind of malware or ransomware or something like that on our system. Now, that's not our tabulation system. That's our email, if you will. We are backing up periodically so that we are able to reconstruct from that point on. We are not going to be frozen in time as to, we've got to pay them $10,000 to get, access back to our data again. The other thing that I think is a potential out there is what the Secretary of State does for the state, as well as what we do here in addition to that locally, and that is posting periodic election results on election night. If there are erroneous results that look like ours out on the internet, we've got to do something about that. So we have some plans. We're working with the Department of Emergency Management at the state level to come up with some scenarios so that when misinformation goes out, or whether it be, the polls are staying open an extra hour longer because of X, Y, Z, which is not true. We're going to be working with the state as well as the public information officers for all of the counties as well as here. So I think we are going to be prepared to address those when they pop up. Whether we're going to be able to figure out all the little groundhogs that pop up out of the way, I don't know, but I know the attempt is being made.
Okay.
So I can't give you, oh, absolutely.
Okay. The next agenda item is Isaac, and that was Steve's, and Steve's on vacation. I don't know that it behooves us to discuss that item without him present, unless somebody wants to raise any issues. Okay. Sharing voter instruction. Arnold, number 10.
Yeah, I brought this up because I read about it in another state, and it seemed, given our local history with ICE, and I'm not expressing opinion one way or another against about ICE, that's not the point. The point is whether there isn't any kind of thinking about how to handle similar situations in Pima County, so that if somebody asked Brad or asked the registrar for information about potential targets of immigration law, how would you respond?
Well, I don't have charge of the voter registration.
No, I understand that, but if somebody asked you to do that.
Well, here's what I would tell them. Certainly, I would direct them first to the county recorder's office. But there is information that is publicly available. I believe, and I don't have the document in front of me, but I think if you just as a citizen wanted to go down and get a copy of the voter registration file, it's not going to show you things like their mother's maiden name or their last four of their social security. It's not going to give you their birth date, but it may give you their name, their address, their birth year, and things of that nature. So there is some public information that is, for lack of a better term, public, that anybody can go and get.
But would it allow people to see what elections, if any, somebody had participated in before, whether those were federal elections or local elections, or both?
Voter history is captured, but I don't believe that is disclosed within the procedures manual that says that it's available for public viewing. You can find out whether a person is active or inactive, I think, but I think that's the extent of
I
it.
have some input there. The quarter does give a quarterly drop of the database to the parties, and in that database, there is the voter history of the last 4 elections, I believe. So you do see that. However, I don't understand why ICE would be interested in that, because almost every one of those people should be, unless they're federal only voters, they should be U.S. citizens. And I'm not sure why ICE would be interested in U.S. citizens.
I think the only thing ICE didn't care if you vote it necessarily. I read the article, I think I read this somewhere else too. ICE was looking for, in fact, no, it wasn't ICE. The county was looking for validation, an audit basically of their database. We've talked about this here at other venues of, you know, what do? You get this thing to a voter registration database out there, people are registering to vote. And frankly, there's no verification of citizenship. I don't care what anybody says, there's not. So this county reporter says, I want to send this to ICE and have them tell me, because they got their data, run that comparison against their data and our data, and say, hey, these people shouldn't be registered to vote. Now, what ICE does with it, that's what ICE does with it. But they were trying to validate their voter registration database. That's why I believe when I read this in another place, said.
So it still is is this something that people are protesting as a practice because it divulges information that otherwise would not be available?
Believe
Correct.
me, how so?
Well, you just, from what I understand, you're saying that,
Are you saying that happened here?
No, see, this was in,
Oh, no,
okay.
this was in New York.
Okay.
where
Yeah,
it was.
yeah.
Okay.
but the practice of sending the data to ICE
Mhm.
to be vetted so the county can scrutinize its list of eligible voters is something which on the face of it is not a problem.
Right.
But there's been such a, I'm not saying I advocate one way or the other, but there's been such a concern, particularly in Tucson, in restricting practices that might put undocumented people in a bad position, that
I have no big problem with that.
I'm sorry?
I have no problem with that myself, okay? The bottom line is, in my opinion, the law says you must be a citizen to vote. You know,
well,
that's the law. And please don't tell me it's not, okay?
well, the sentence is not complete, because we do have federal voters.
Right, but the law says, and I forgot to bring it in, I forgot to bring my voter registration form, because right there in the top part of it says you have to be a US citizen, a resident of the jurisdiction, 18 years old on election day. Right below it says it's a class 6 felony to lie about that.
And all the federal only people do is, you don't have to provide, all you have to say is, I'm a US citizen. You don't have to provide proof
Right,
of citizenship.
That's correct.
But you have to be a citizen, even to get a federal only ballot. You just don't have to prove it.
Arnie, I think your concern should be addressed again in the procedures manual. That's where the county gets its rules for procedure, and if you need to comment and express your concerns to the secretary.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it to actually make a proposal for the procedures manual.
You can express a concern.
Sorry?
You can express a concern.
Well, I was wondering if this group had any more information about this. And, I mean, even to the point where the county would say, we would think of doing this. Because even though the city might object, the county might not care, because they think it's a good practice.
So here's my input on this. I had asked at the end, well, actually Chris Rhodes, while at the end was in the room, of whether there was a external or internal audit. And Chris Rhodes' answer was a laundry list of things that they do to ensure some sort of integrity of the voter database. But an audit was not one of the things they did, internal or external. And I think that's woefully inadequate. I think there needs to be a periodic audit, maybe not every single person, but certainly statistical analysis of, is the database have, what sort of integrity does the database have?
Well, it even goes back to the thing that Tom Ryan did with the election database, even to see if the data was the same or consistent. That would be a step forward.
Again, we go back to the
We're
procedures manual. You've got to
gravitating
put all this in
away
your
from
comments.
the topic of discussion and expanding the nature of the discussion. Let's restrict it to, do we share our data with ICE? And I think the answer is.
Or do we ask ICE to help us with our data?
And I don't
That's really the point.
know if there's anybody in this room that knows, that can give a definitive answer on that.
Okay.
So please do comment on that at least as a concern, the procedures manual.
Levoy.
Well, I think this is a discussion, this elections thing, going back to picking up where we were trying to once upon a time, even before Grady was here, you know, what does selections integrity look like? I mean, what does it look like? When I worked in engineering, we have a target out there. Okay? We have a defined target out there that we know when we're done. We know when we have the answer. We know when we're there. And there is nothing here that even begins to talk about that. We can't even agree, I don't think, on what, if I were to define a system and call it elections, what, and that's where you have to really start. What is an election? Okay? What is it? What it be to me, I would say if I had a whiteboard, we need whiteboards.
You're right, Mike.
Well, I no one would pick it up. But you could draw this thing and say, look, there's obviously the vote tabulation. You've got voters, and you've got candidates inside that, if I was going to draw that thing. Then you've got the procedures and laws that come in as system controls and all this kind of thing. So where do we draw our system boundaries in there? If we're only going to draw our system boundaries around election tabulation, vote tabulation, then we are not an elections, in my opinion, integrity commission or vote tabulation commission. We don't include the voters in that, at least at a minimum. Candidates, it's kind of like their own world out there. They do their petitions, they do their things like that. Eventually they get qualified and certified, so you could call that one of the control functions that comes in to the system. It's really the whole different world that they do that. So you've got voters, you've got elections and tabulations. So what do we look at? In fact, that made some comment, I think Ryan, about, well, we don't have purview over the secretary or the recorder, thank you. But it's still part of the elections. Doesn't mean that the group can't say, here's what we think elections ought to look like, and you don't have any control. We don't have any control over him either, for that matter. We don't have any control over anything. We're just advisory at best. So what does an election look like? Does it include the, I said this before, I think the elephant in the room here is frankly, it's voters, it's voter registration piece and that kind of thing. So, but we don't want to talk about that, then fine, we could decide we're not ever going to talk about voter registration kind of thing. So what does an election look like?
You know, and as somebody that frequently says it's not within the purview of the commission to tell them what to do, I don't have a problem having the discussion.
Good.
As long as there's an understanding that our ability to influence that operation is nil. You know, having the discussion is worthwhile. And if you want to get to the point where you have a discussion of something outside the purview of this commission, and you want to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors that says, we think you ought to talk to these people about this issue, I don't have a problem doing that either. But that's because of, because of the way we're structured. That's how things have to work. You know, and then I think there needs to be a realistic expectation as to what might come of that recommendation. And frequently it's nothing.
I agree. But that's, so I'm throwing this out there. It's like, well, what does this really look like?
Well, a couple things. One is that in our short history as a group, we have done those things and they've been taken up as serious recommendations on the board. But that's just an important point. You never know what's going to happen if you don't try it.
The board, which is
I'm sorry?
overseeing, the board, which is overseeing the elections department, not the recorder's office.
Right.
But they have concerns that we might have, or the citizens might have, regardless, and they're free to speak out about it. But I want to ask a question about the way you approach the problem.
Okay.
First of all, there is a long history describing what an election is or ought to be.
Okay.
That may or may not be germane to your point, but I think a more reasonable question is, often with a problem that's not well structured, a reasonable question to ask is, what is not an election? So we don't know what election is,
You start with
we
the
don't
non.
know it has certain properties, but we may still say, well, this is not an election, right? Would you, do you have any thoughts about that?
You want to start with the null hypothesis, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's fine.
What would that be with respect to integrity, do you think? Does it mean that you have a dictator, or you,
Interesting question. No, well, I mean, obviously, if you don't have elections, do you have election integrity? In other words,
well, some people think if you had a
Russia has,
suitably qualified person, that person's choice would represent the group. And you don't need to spend money on elections as we think of them.
there are people,
I'm not saying,
there are people who believe that.
you know, so you have no answer about the null hypothesis?
I don't want to rein this one in, because I think
Yeah. Yeah, I get it.
we've gone from whether or not we want to have an audit, or define the scope of work of the basic
Basically,
commission,
Yeah.
as opposed to whether or not we want to actually have elections or not.
Well, there's a difference between defining the work specific versus the view of, I guess, the problem view as like you say, we can't do much work regarding the Secretary of State or anybody else except issue comments and that kind of thing.
You know,
And it
and
does influence the legislature.
Well, that's true. It's true. It's tough. We've had some discussion with legislators and
Well, Jack, you didn't address John's point, he's not here one way or the other today,
okay.
about changing the name of the commission, because in his view, it has nothing to do with integrity at all. It has to do with counting votes. And we're an advisory commission
Yeah.
on counting votes.
Well,
Would you rather deal with the problem by changing the definition of our,
I don't care.
you don't care?
I don't care which one it is. And I think the point John made, it does get into this, is really what are we? You know, what are we?
So there's where I'd like to add my input. I think every county should have an election integrity committee, and it should be looking over both the recorder's office and if there is an additional elections department, that as well. Maybe the candidate stuff, I'm not sure that they should be, overlooking of signatures for candidates to get on the ballot, but it should be both. If you are trying, the purpose of an integrity commission is to give the public some sort of feeling that there is some sort of integrity in the voting process, in the election process. And if you don't have that, the people thinking that they can vote for somebody and that person would legitimately win an office, or a ballot initiative would be legitimately passed, now you're into a realm of potentially going into a chaos or anarchy situation. So the integrity is important to have for that purpose, and it shouldn't just be focused on counting of ballots. It should be also the registering of voters as well. So that's my input.
And I would say, based on your initial comment, that it should include this, and this. That's not within the purview of the Board of Supervisors to appoint that kind of commission. That would,
Well,
hey, for one thing, you have one election integrity commission in the state of Arizona at the county level, and this is it. This would have to come either from the Secretary of State or the governor. In my opinion.
legislature.
Or the legislature would have to create a county commission. And I don't know that the legislature has the authority, well, yeah, they do. They can. It just becomes another function under, I think, Title 11 of what counties are gonna have and what counties are gonna do. So if you wanna get to that point, then it's an obligation of either individuals or political parties lobbying the legislature to create an election integrity commission and defining the function of that commission within the county. That's certainly not the scope of this commission, or quite frankly, the Board of Supervisors within the county to be able to define that. So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying, but it's not something that we can have.
I have no illusions that the board, this commission has the potential to change that. Maybe individuals within the commission can go to the legislators, and effect a change. But yes, I understood.
Okay.
I'd like to back up just a little bit. We seem to be hung up on whether we can force the recorder or influence the recorder to do things. I think the recorder is very open to good ideas. If we had a good idea, we couldn't force her to adopt it, but I think she would be open to considering it. So I think we're hung up on this. We don't have any role over her. We don't have any role over Brad.
Actually, quite the opposite. I'm not hung up with that at all myself. I mean,
Whoever is-
I'm not sure where to look, but the question regarding that though, the discussion with my folks outside here, has there ever been any consideration of having a recorder, one or more representative, a real voting, live, voting members on the commission? Has
Yes.
there ever been?
We've invited them in the past, and basically they've said, go consent.
But in
We've
the-
had
in the more
informal
distant-
relationships
Yeah.
Well, no,
where without rule,
right,
we routinely got together with designated people or
sure.
ad hoc selections. So there is that history.
Yeah, we've done that too. It's just, it's the actual idea of having somebody that's on a commission, is a titled commissioner, full rights, all that kind of stuff, with one or more persons. Just a question, that's all.
In the past, the more distant past, when we were housed over at the county building, we did have pretty regular attendance by some of the recorder's office. Some things happened and the recorder sort of disassociated or something. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Or the county. The county acting as a facilitator, or actually communicating with people who wouldn't communicate directly with us in order to get certain problems solved.
Is this an ombudsman or something?
I'm sorry?
Ombudsman?
No, these were John Moffett, and then there was another guy who used to actually come to commission who served that role.
Technically, John Voorhees is in that position.
Right, yeah,
Oh, that's right.
but he's not been active.
He's only attended once or twice that I
He was here, got to go back a year ago, a little bit right on. He showed a couple times.
Like everybody else,
So
he
back
got
to your
real excited
question.
when he first got appointed to the position, and his enthusiasm was fading.
Yeah, that didn't take long.
So what's the point,
So-
what's the point of defining what it looks like? What do you want to do with the reason?
Well, that's a good question, and I've mulled that over my head, do I want to suggest we do a formal document, say, okay, just a quickie document that says, hey, here's what elections look like, which a couple of us can prepare outside of here and bring it up and say, hey, you guys want to talk about this? Later, we can do that and say, here's what we think it is, throw it out, everybody throw darts at it, we can, a couple of us can do it, because John and I talked about it quite a bit, obviously.
And I
What do
would-
we do
I
with
would-
that document once we have it? What's the purpose of it?
It could become it could eventually, if you wanted to, become a statement of, here's the position statement of the commission, say, here's what we think elections take to look like.
I would posit that, yeah, if you can craft that document, there is a section in the bylaws of this body that says, this is what we do,
Yeah.
and this is who we are.
Okay.
Lord knows it's about time to.
But never,
You went out of the bylaws.
yeah, that's a good point, though, you're right, it does, it doesn't ever go to that next level, which is what posed my issues.
And I would just offer this, that it be included. I know John has said, if you don't encompass everything, we have no integrity. And I would say that the integrity of the room that's under video surveillance is important.
Yeah.
It's important to me as a voter to know that once the ballots get in there, and it isn't this commission necessarily, but the organized political parties. if you wanted to be a real putz about it, if you don't show up on counting day as a member of one of the two major parties, nobody goes in that room. Ballots don't get counted. And that's part of having a process that has integrity to it. You may not like that control, but that control does exist. Whether the Greens or the Libertarians ultimately rise to that level of influence or not, I don't know. Right now, it doesn't say Republicans and Democrats. It says the two major political parties. If there's some kind of a green wave out there and all of a sudden the Green Party becomes one of the two major parties within the county, then it's the Greens that exercise that kind of influence. I think the influence of the political parties in counties other than those that regularly do a hand count audit has something to do with integrity. And quite frankly, counties that don't do a hand count audit because the major political parties don't want to play in the game is disgraceful.
It's usually one party that won't play it again with the other.
So to say that this entity has nothing to do with election integrity is a misnomer.
Well, yeah.
Now, the integrity of the electoral process may go way outside the scope of this commission, but this commission has a lot to do with the integrity of the electoral process. We may not cover all of it, but we cover a significant piece of it.
And the vast majority of voters out there have no idea what that process really is you're talking about.
That I do not disagree with.
So my view of this is more of a very top level piece of it. You know, how does the average voter out there look at the voting process? And we've talked about the perception here before of voting and the fact that Arizona takes 12 days to count votes, this kind of thing. Okay, somebody said, well, we just need to educate the voters. That's not going to change perception. Okay, in fact, there was a recent piece in Arizona Star, I should have said it, but maybe you saw it, about a survey that ranked Arizona at the bottom for Arizona for perceived election integrity. You see that? Now, there were some questions about the methodology in there, but
Big questions.
well, but it's interesting, I think, as I recall, it was done by local groups around, so there's no normalization of the data kind of stuff across the board. But even so, here's people, and I think they're academics, in Arizona that answered this survey in such a manner that we ranked pretty bad. That is not, you can't ignore that.
But academics nationwide
Yeah,
typically know very little, if nothing, about elections.
that's
They're
true.
divided.
But so they're equally ignorant across the board,
Right.
that's certain, okay? So, again.
And I think one of the big problems, and just having spent 2.5 weeks with my sister-in-law, who's from Virginia, and trying to explain our early voting process to her, where they have nothing that even resembles the early voting process. I think the biggest issue you have, particularly in the state of Arizona, where we have people that come here from everywhere and say, you do what? How? You can, it didn't work that way in Wisconsin or Michigan or Montana or the Dakotas or Nebraska or Kansas or wherever I moved here from. We have 50 very disparate voting procedures in this country. And it's trying to get people to understand. And that would be the bigger issue with the election process in getting the voter to understand what the process looks like is, because if you grew up and have spent your entire voting life in a state other than Arizona, you're looking at a very different animal than you're looking at here.
We're not the only state that does early voting.
And I'm not saying we are, but everybody handles the process differently. Yeah.
We're not doing it, and I'm not sure if 20 states or something came around here. Ohio, I know, does early voting. You never hear about Ohio having a huge problem with their
No.
elections.
You hear a lot about North Carolina having a huge problem.
It's more than there's a lot more going on there than early voting, okay? It's a mess there, I agree. Florida has had problems there, but that was in early voting. And I keep warning my friends here, I said, we vacation in Florida during election season, it's a mess. I keep telling you, the only thing that's keeping Arizona out of the news is Florida, okay? And Florida, from what I've seen, the new governor, he's fixing that problem down there. I'd be surprised if they have that issue next legislative cycle. So,
I agree with you, the problem is perception.
yeah,
And I have a presentation that I take around to various Democratic groups. These are people who are already involved in politics, and almost everybody says after the presentation, I had no idea they did all that.
yeah.
And how do we get this information out to the more general public?
Good question.
Maybe you should be doing something similar for the Republican Party.
Is there a need to create a sense of trustworthiness by doing some public opinion studies and propaganda to let people know that we exist and what's being done throughout the system to keep it?
All the above, I think would be a good measure, but let's get us kind of outside here. So rather than belay this too much, I guess what I think I heard was that I'll go off with a couple of my campaign we'll put together some little top level thing about what we think election integrity looks like and bring it back to the group.
Yeah, and as you craft that, as it pertains to the scope of this group, define not only what integrity is as far as this group is concerned,
That's not
but what it's not as well.
well. That's not what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm willing to take the big picture view of elections in Arizona, and it will have nothing to do, as far as I'm concerned, it will have nothing to do with what we can actually do in this group. Realizing that there's not a lot, we don't have a lot of insight into this, make recommendations, but that's my whole approach to this, has been that the scope of elections is bigger, in fact, bigger than this group.
So why not just call it oversight commission? I mean, I'm
That
still bothered by the question of talking about something without having a definition of what it is or what it isn't.
I agree.
Can you propose what you have as a bylaw change?
Possibly, yeah, because I think there's a hole in it, as we mentioned, I think there's a hole in bylaws that maybe doesn't quite go there, so that's a good, that's a good suggestion, so, yeah.
So I have input. So integrity is something in the eye of the public, and it's not down to a particular county, it's across the whole state. So the public nationwide views Arizona's election process with some sort of fuzzy integrity, and is that good enough or not? So I think that we need to consider that. Integrity is in the eye of the public nationwide of the whole state, and this commission has impact over just one portion in this one county of that process. So I think that needs to be considered here too, is that even if the elections department did everything right, and something else in the state, and maybe another county or in the recorder's office here in Pima County, something went wrong, the whole integrity of our system looks bad across the state.
I think you make a good point, but going back to some of the things that were mentioned earlier today, I think that, not a cynical view, but an honest view of the whole process is, the reason the system works is that the parties do these things out of selfish interest. They're not interested in truth and beauty in the American way. They're interested in making sure that the votes are counted legitimately and that we don't make mistakes. So I think integrity is a nice word, but it has nothing to do with the reality of the situation, which is okay. But I don't think that your concern with the broader issues is taking account of things that we should be doing. For example, we have no independent voters on this commission. Approximately a third of all.
Are you an independent?
Yes, but we're not reaching out to independent groups. I mean, there are national groups, there are state groups, and we haven't made an initiative to include them, particularly with respect to representation on the commission. And that's not my point. My point is that the issue of integrity or legitimacy of the system involves issues that are hot today that we don't address at all. For example, why shouldn't I, as a citizen, be able to vote in every primary that my taxes pay for? Other states do that. There's a growing movement to do that. Some states, a very few, have done that since the 18th century. So there are a bunch of issues like that having to do with the ability of individuals to express their choices and to deal with that information, which we have for a long time not discussed at all. And I think that would go to your broader concern about not how people perceive us, which I don't think is that important. I think it's how we perceive ourselves.
Okay, Barbara.
I
And
just
then
want to challenge a statement about
I'm sorry.
independents can vote in every primary.
No, that's not what I mean, Barbara, missing the point.
Yeah,
And that's just how far
but that's what you
removed
said.
that, I know, but the point is that you can vote in every one, not just in other primaries. I can't vote in the Republican, Democratic, and Green primaries.
Then you vote more than once. That's
I'm sorry?
Then you vote more than once. That's pretty weird.
Well, you're raising a good question. It's one of the questions that typically is raised. But in other states, it's called a blanket primary. And it's been used since the 18th century in a few states. But there is an independence movement, which, depending on which wing you affiliate with, some of these people want to allow independents to vote in the Republican and Democratic primaries. They don't care about the other parties. Other advocates want the blanket primary system adopted in all states.
Done with the jungle primary?
And,
Sorry?
and we are way off topic.
Well, I don't know about that because it relates to,
No,
Well,
and he was not, have it put on the agenda next month, I'd be happy to discuss it ad nauseum. I would like to defer, based on your comments, Grady, back to, and I pulled them and looked at them again this morning. There's a one sentence in the minutes of the July something Board of Supervisors meeting that says, create an election integrity commission and appoint members as expeditiously as possible, and that's paraphrased. But that's the guidance that we were given from the Board of Supervisors that created this commission. There was never any desire or intent on the part of supervisors that the fact that this was an election integrity commission, that we were gonna instill a feeling of flawlessness throughout the nation in the Arizona electoral process. And I think we can either get back to why we were created in the first place, and it was a result of, I believe, the 2006 bond election, which caused a lot of problems.
RTA, right?
Yeah.
So, it was a question of ballot counting, so there was somebody to oversee the ballot counting process. You know, if you want to change the name of the commission to the Ballot Counting Oversight Commission, I don't have a problem with that. We'll just have to submit it to the Board of Supervisors as a requested change if you're uncomfortable with the perception that we give the public of what we do as the Election Integrity Commission. And I think all of those are discussions for another day.
But to your point, it's good about that. It stood up because of the RTA. The Board of Supervisors stood the thing up. They did not set out what the real purpose of the commission was.
It's exactly what I just said.
Yeah.
That's the extent of the comment
Okay.
that was made.
Well, maybe we should work on that.
but historically, just to correct your point, there was a lot more complexity of opinion when the commission was originally created. And more importantly, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was serious consideration and leadership of trying to do things to restructure the way elections work in Pima County. Not for the sort of goody-goody reasons people are talking about here today, but for efficiency and reliability reasons. So that's simply not true, Brian. If you look at the minutes, you'll see it's all in the minutes.
I'm not talking about the minutes of this commission.
Yeah.
I'm talking
I'm
about,
talking about the minutes. the Board of
there's
Supervisors.
correspondence between this commission and the Board of Supervisors about those issues.
And I don't argue that. I'm talking about why this commission was created and the guidance that it was given by the Board of Supervisors as its creation. And Levoy pointed out, yeah, none.
Okay, so I think we could work on that.
Yeah.
And we'll come up with some proposal. And maybe it just goes down to a statement in the bylaws to clarify what it is. I remember reading that, and I kind of scratched my head going, it's kind of, okay.
Well, it would also be good because it would serve as a way of assessing each year
Yeah.
how much progress we've made
That's kind of-
in this, what's included in that statement.
That's, yes, all the above.
Yeah.
Okay. Arnie,
Yeah, I'm gonna wait until Steve comes back to the meeting because he has some comments on what I was thinking of saying on that way.
all right, future agenda items. Put Steve back on for next month again,
Okay.
and put Arnie back on for next month again.
I believe by the time the next meeting comes around, that the Republican Party will have made a decision whether to participate in the presidential preference election.
Yes.
So I would like to have that as agenda item.
I believe Governor Ducey will declare the week of the 16th, so we should know, September 16th. We'll know whether the Republicans are playing.
So I'll just list it
Presidential preference, participation by Republicans or
Yeah.
something?
Brad, it hasn't come up here, but there's been discussion of the cost of running a senatorial election, it's been in the courts. Is the cost, from your point of view, essentially a bogus issue, or is it costly to run that election for the county? If it were just for one candidate?
We've done it before. If an election is called, it will,
Topic fixed.
Future agenda item?
yeah,
Topic fixed. All right.
Okay,
So how do you want that listed?
special election costs.
Special election costs.
All elections are special, but
I have two, I want to make sure that Levoy's items on the agenda for the future, number 11, on today's agenda. And then I'd like consideration of a standard item being added to the agenda called, I don't have good words for it, but a review from the last meeting, because it seems that our agenda becomes restrictive to what we can discuss, and things come up that we might have discussed in the previous meeting, but we can't discuss it in the following meeting because it wasn't on the agenda. So is there, I can come up with some kind of way to do that?
Welcome to the meeting.
I understand what you're saying, I think, and the only way you can do that is to say, have a standing agenda item that says further discussion of previous agenda items
Yeah, something like that.
is gonna run us afoul of the
Yep.
open meeting law.
absolutely.
Because basically what you're saying is, I wanna come up with a way to discuss whatever I wanna discuss without it being on the agenda.
No. I'm saying if it was an agenda item, then we have to go back and say, last month, we talked about item number 2, and since that time I have a comment I'd like to add to that. Not an open,
May I make a suggestion?
Sure.
Just list it as previous review. So if somebody does have a question, or they have something from the last one where they have an additional piece of information that can be done up, I
Yeah,
would
because as chairman, you
recommend
have
that
that
the
purview.
chair keep it short.
If we were
when
doing,
you've done that, you've reviewed what you've talked about, and you follow up on it, any new things. And so I'm just saying, as a member, I should have the ability to talk about items that we talked about before. but not introduce a new item.
Why would you not want to introduce a new item if you want to?
We have 3 weeks
Okay.
after the meeting to.
Yeah, I get the notice that this is the future agenda item, this is the future agenda, the agenda's set, and then I'm restricted to that, because that's what I ran into at the last meeting. I wanted to follow up because we had this discussion about, where this problem came from with the county registrar and how they get to verify signatures. So I did some research on it, but by the time I got done, the agenda was already closed, and so I just made this stupid assumption based on my understanding of the open meeting law, so that I could talk about that in the chairman's report, because that's where it appears. And I was told not to, so I snuck it in a different part of the meeting.
I think-
I would posit that maybe the chairman's report isn't
The review.
it's inappropriate, because basically it gives the chairman the opportunity to say whatever the chairman wants to say.
You want to take the chairman's report out, I can do that too. That was,
You know what?
that was
You know,
fine.
I'm
That was
suggesting that.
something that was put forth
Here's
by
the problem.
Jimmy.
Here's the problem.
Sure, so,
We don't do minutes, okay?
yes, sir, we do.
I know, but if you did actual paper minutes, I don't know how you do it, but, well, hear me out. During the course of minute reviews, that's exactly what you get to when you do this kind of thing you're talking about.
Except it doesn't address the open meeting law issue. So one way around that might be for people to propose linkages between, say, what's officially on the agenda and previous agendas or agenda issues as a part of the open, open announcement of what the agenda is going to be. So the agenda is not just 5 things, it's 5 things with linkages to other meeting agendas that you might think are appropriate. So at least we've divulged that to the public, and if people want to come, they can come, and the open meeting law people won't be criticizing Brian for, does that make sense?
Another way that we could help facilitate this is that we get our notification that the agenda is closed way before, I think, what the law prescribes. I think if we publish the agenda 24 hours in advance of the meeting, that is sufficient to accommodate the open meetings law. We're doing it a week, 10 days in advance, which is good for you.
County requires that it's posted at the beginning of the week of the meeting,
Okay.
which for us puts it at Monday, which I fudge on. We've gone as much as 3 days before a meeting is when we've done. But
I didn't know.
I have to basically go by what the county has told me I need to do, so that's what I'm trying to do. I cut it by a couple of days because I don't get answers the same day I send out an email.
Right.
I might not get a reply for a week before then, so I've come up, you're given a week's worth of time to go ahead and figure out if you want to add something to that.
See, and the way the Board of Supervisors has dealt with that issue is they meet on Tuesday.
Okay,
So if you publish it on the first of the
we're in
month,
violation of the open meetings law by this discussion, right?
We're talking
So-
future agenda items.
So I was proposing this as a future agenda.
agenda items and whether or not they're appropriate to the agenda.
We've got a week, so you've got a week. The requirement is that for late, last minute stuff, it has to go to the chair for approval. So all you have to do is email Brian and say, hey, Brian, we'll get this on the email.
And he sends me an email and say, put it on.
And
That's it.
I don't perceive or actually want that much control if you want it on the agenda, unless it's completely out of left field. Quite frequently, I don't care. But I would offer this to you as an alternative. If you think you might have something that you would like to talk about, put it on the
Yeah.
agenda. We've been carrying Arnie for 3 or 4 months. I certainly don't have a problem doing that.
Okay.
I would say if there's a possibility that you'd like to have the discussion, ask to have it put on the agenda. We'll put it on the agenda. If you don't have anything meaningful to say about it, or you'd like to move it forward, I don't have a problem with that either. I would caution if somebody gets out there and looks at it, the Board of Supervisors, if they're gonna move something to a future agenda, it has to be date certain that we're gonna talk about this, simply because there are people, and I don't anticipate a flood of the public coming in here to talk about it, but there are members of the public that want to address agenda items to the Board of Supervisors. And if they show up and and that agenda item gets moved forward, they don't want to keep showing up to talk about something that's never going to get talked about. So,
Just a point, I think the bylaws are more flexible even than that with respect to agendas, because I think the commission can overrule the leader with respect to changing the agenda at the meeting. So if there's good reason to. And this,
No, not at the meeting. The commission can overrule the chair prior to the meeting.
but if the agenda is announced, the commission could take a poll before the meeting physically occurs to change the agenda. We've taken polls like that on other issues. So conceivably, the agenda can be changed that way.
It's just moving things around. I don't think we can add a new item without having posted.
There's still a window, there's still a window
Yeah.
that you have to deal with.
And going back to the chairman's report,
okay. Yeah,
I agree with you. I think Karen initiated this because there were times when she wanted to say, well, I wrote the letter you asked me to write, or something like that, where she was recording. I think this description of update on current events and review of the agenda is way too broad. So I would say
Yeah,
leave it in, but necessary updates or something like that.
It's the chairman's report, and if you want me to craft language that goes in parenthetical expression or with a statement under the chairman's report, needs to be restricted to the chairman addressing tasks that he or she was required to complete at the direction of the commission.
Tell me what you want me to put down, and just send me an email and say, change it to this, and I'll do it. It doesn't matter to me.
Does the board have does Herbert have a report in their agenda on the board of supervisors?
No,
Not
Leave it up to chairman either.
that I'm aware of.
but he's not a member of the
That's
board
true.
of supervisors.
There is a chair, right?
Yeah.
But there is no equivalent chairman's report.
Not that I know of.
No.
Like I said, it
And
was
that's
the
why I
previous
said
chair who
there's-
put it in there, and
I was gonna steal from their language if it was.
And
And
that is,
maybe the more appropriate thing to do is take the chairman's report out, and if the chair has done anything on behalf of or at the direction of the commission, it just get included as an agenda item.
the open meetings laws does specifically call out the chairman's report as being one thing that can't be on the agenda item. So that is one thing that the state, or the legislature did want to have in there, to have the possibility of having that. Whether we choose to do that here or not,
Yeah.
that's another question.
leave it as the chairman's report, and just take out the description out underneath. Does that work?
We'll send you something about that.
Leave it out for next month,
The chairman's report.
and put discussion of the chairman's report.
I love it.
If there is one.
I love it.
No, I mean,
Discussing.
And my intent there is that we discuss the relevance or lack thereof of having a chairman's report.
So
As a
maybe it should be
regular item on the
discussion,
agenda and how it should be structured.
this discussion of the idea of the chairman's report,
Okay,
just to be clear.
yeah, a discussion of the idea of the chairman's report, not a discussion of the chairman's report. You know, and I'm sympathetic to your position. I mean, I don't think I should be given a bully pulpit that gives me any extraordinary authority.
I wasn't complaining.
No, no, but I'm very cognizant of that fact because I have that argument with people all the time. The only benefit to being chairman is I run the meeting. It doesn't give me any extraordinary authority.
Well, don't you break ties too?
No, I am a voting member of the commission. I'm not, my voting is restricted to breaking ties.
But the point you made about having a way of developing ideas is an important one, but I think within the context of the rules we have, it's possible to put those things on the agenda on agenda night.
Okay.
I have two questions. One, do you want the procedures manual, city of Tucson election update listed
Yes.
on there again for next month?
Yes.
Okay, and what I have down is E-ISIC, questions to the recorder, presidential preference election, special elections cost, what does election integrity look like, and a discussion on the idea of the chairman's report. Is there any other items that need to be added?
Well, also, I have my questions. I'm gonna have a question for the.
That's questions to the recorder.
Yeah.
That was one of the.
That was mentioned.
I'm sorry?
He got
He
it.
mentioned
He
that?
mentioned
Yeah,
it.
I'm sorry.
That was item number 2.
It's a permanent agenda item.
Okay. So we'll add procedures manual, city of Tucson election.
Brad?
For the September 20th meeting, now that we've moved our primary election back, meaning in 2020, we have to do some things sooner than we used to. So on October the 1st, the Board of Supervisors, no later than October the 1st, the Board of Supervisors will be establishing new precinct lines if there's any needed whatsoever. I only have one precinct line that's going to be moved between 2 adjacent precincts up in the Marana area. But if we want to talk about establishing precincts, this has nothing to do with establishing polling places. That's done at a later date. Just that geographic area known as a precinct is going to need to be established. As it stands now, it's going to be just the Board of Supervisors saying they are as established except for these 2 precincts.
What, if the 2 precincts will be merged, is that it?
No, what it was is there was, I realize this is a subject for further discussion, and I'll send out some maps in advance of the September 20th meeting. But basically, there was an area of vacant land that had a precinct line going through it, and there's a housing development being built there. So we want to make sure everybody in that housing development, as much as possible, goes in the same
So
precinct.
you gotta make sure the bedrooms and
Yeah.
bedroom are the same.
That's exactly what would happen if we didn't leave the line.
So precinct changes, that's not,
Precinct changes.
Whatever happened to the precinct with 0 voters in it?
Oh, it's still there.
So you're not gonna get rid of that?
No, can't.
Can't.
Yeah.
Okay, future meeting dates. Anybody have any problems with September 20th?
I think that may be the same date as the hearing they're having on the procedures manual. There are 2 dates that they gave.
I have no idea. I'm not gonna be able to call it up that quick, so.
I think that's the date I wrote down for the Phoenix, but that's okay.
Were you going to physically go up to?
Yeah,
80
one of the
minutes?
2, and I think that's the one I thought would be right.
October 18th,
No problem.
November 15th?
I will be in Florida, and I will not be calling you.
Thank you.
When do you leave?
November 2nd, I think, something like that. We'll be gone the entire month, so.
Will you use your early hour?
We will go to the early polling place, yes. Well, no, I'm not, I don't go to the city, I live in the county.
Yeah, nothing to vote on.
Unless
you're-
Those are anywhere in demand.
Wrong party. No. I'm sorry. All right.
Could we,
Are you gonna meet in December?
was my next question, do we historically meet in December?
No. No.
Fine with me.
And we would meet, I mean, if we met the 3rd Friday, it would be the 20th, which is the weekend before Christmas, so.
Just, I'm not suggesting that we have a December meeting, because I just assume not, but that's going to put us less than 90 days away from the presidential preference election.
It's okay. Grady's going to tell us whether the Republicans are playing. And my understanding is, if, never mind, discussion next month. Even I like to bring up stuff that's inappropriate. Okay, anything else?
We'll be adjourned.
We stand adjourned.